Thank you for your question. I suspect that it's a bit of both. The Commission has certainly undertaken more advocacy and media and communication, so I think that we're more visible, which is leading people to report to us. Also, where we represent complainants in high-profile matters such as the Vicky Momberg matter, that raises our profile as the Commission and also informs people that certain utterances are unacceptable, which may also encourage them to report more to the Commission. I don't think that we would deduce that South Africa was becoming more racist. I think that we've certainly pointed in the report to aspects such as social media, which allows people to publish and reach much wider audiences. And if what they're publishing is derogatory or racist or hate speech, then obviously more people see it, will often receive a complaint about it. So that also increases reporting to the Commission as well. So social media certainly, I think, increase the visibility of certain behavior and conduct which may previously we would not have been aware of because it happened in a private setting. Our two high receipt offices are the Cape Town office and the Gauteng provincial office. They are the busiest offices and they receive the highest number of complaints, and it's the Gauteng provincial office that receives the most. So the majority of complaints across the board are all related to race-based equality complaints.
Can you give a breakdown between Cape Town and Gauteng? Exactly how many of is that 705?
I don't have that information. Oh, sure.
I think if you look at page 23 of the report, which
we've not used that as a report.
Down the media section.
Okay.
Okay, so
sure. Okay, while Jay is talking. The Gauteng actually has the highest number of complaints according to the report, saying 8% as far as issues of equality are concerned, followed by Western Cape with 15% and KwaZulu-Natal at 14%. And we look at page 24 of the report, again the highest complaints under the equality sector will be issues of race, followed by disability issues, and then sexual orientation, social.
Yeah.
I think the important point is also that inequality is not just about race, but in the context of in which we work in, inequality relates to discrimination based on age, belief, color, etc. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that disability and ethnic origin come after race as well, and they're equally important. And I think that Alex can probably speak a little bit more to it, but disability has been on the increase, and we have seen a significant increase in the number of inequality complaints related to disability. So while race is an important aspect, we also as a Commission feel that it's very important that the other aspects of inequality that are equally important and do have an equally egregious impact on people's lives and on their human rights.
Certainly. I think also in this report we've increasingly noted the how intersecting identities also compound to create more human rights violations. So we're also seeing an intersecting issues where someone might be a black South African who is also disabled, or a black South African who is also gay. So we're seeing where those intersections are also serving to compound human rights violations on a number of different fronts as well. And that's something that we've probably for the first time noted in this report with trends analysis.
Do you have any other questions?
Angela from SABC Radio News. You spoke about debtors and unscrupulous business practices. Are these mainstream businesses, or is it people that are not registered?
It's mainstream businesses, predominantly.
So is it banks?
Including, we did have certain matters against banks that we were involved in, either as the applicant or as amicus curiae.
If I may also just come back to your question, because you've page 25 of the report. We have a couple of copies which we handed out to you. You'll see that the race-related complaints have decreased marginally, as Alex has pointed out, in this year, from 505 to 486. But as the report indicates, they do still remain extremely high on certain provision, but they have decreased somewhat. Okay, I'll come back to you. Angela, do you want to ask a second question?
Yes, I wanted to ask about subpoena powers. You spoke about that. Are you finding that most of the time you have to subpoena people in, or are they willing to participate?
Well, in most cases, people do come to the commission, especially people who are outside government. They readily come to the commission. You do get just a few people who do not come. I think the subpoena powers have become necessary when we deal with interaction with government. Often, government officials do not cooperate as required, of course, by the Constitution and by Section 4.2 of the South African Human Rights Commission Act, that organs of state are required to cooperate with the Commission in the execution of its duties. And you send reminders after reminders, and you find that you don't get any response, or you get a negative response, and then as a result of that, you then are forced to use the coercive measures. We in the Commission believe, as I said earlier on when I did the welcoming address, and I spoke about ADR, we believe that it will help South Africa if we can work together and we can discuss things together and solve problems. So government officials, some of them do cooperate, but we have found that others actually just do not cooperate. So it's an area that still needs improvement.
Okay, I'll take your hand and then I'll go to you. So, do you have another question? Would you mind if we take any question? I'll come back to you after this round.
Yeah, I'm Carter from Japan. I'm just going to take us back to the race settlement as well. I just wanted to know, with the type of complaints you get, are they based on one-on-one racial incidents, or people finding that they're systematically being discriminated against because of their race? Not the keyword, not the group, rather they include race or because of their race.
I believe that the trends seem to indicate that it's majority cases of one-on-one instances, interpersonal, but obviously the Commission receives, it might not even be a big difference in the numbers. The Commission receives lots of complaints based on systemic racial oppression or marginalization as well, yes.
Just to add to that, where we do receive complaints that relate to labor-related matters, we are compelled to pass them on to the relevant body. So we would then, in some instances, pass those on to the CCMA to report to another body. So we often have to be very cognizant that there are other chapter 9s that have been established to do different things. Okay.
Thanks. Jacques Willerick from Kyk Net Verslag. We have a problem with police brutality in South Africa, and I see category 3 arrested, detained, and accused persons. Those complaints. What type of complaints are we looking at here? Is this a type of classic assault that you'd see happening between police officers and people they're trying to arrest, or is there something else to this?
It's quite a mix. There are quite a few things that could relate to people who have been detained because they're migrants or asylum seekers or refugees, because we do have a lot of complaints regarding those aspects. Could relate, there are some complaints that we get that are related to police brutality, although in terms of our referral powers, then often the cases that might be better addressed by other organizations, for instance, IPID. But yes, illegally detained not being allowed their full rights under the Constitution that an arrested or detained person has, and instances of migrants and asylum seekers and refugees being detained in circumstances which don't comply to the applicable regulatory or legal frameworks.
Thanks. Just for the chairperson, Mr. Matola, you mentioned that access in rural areas is one of your main challenges. How much of an impact did that have on the findings of this report, and what is the Commission doing to try and get out to the rural areas? And then secondly, Mr. Gerald, you mentioned that the issues you were on was the access to land and housing and complaints around that. Could you just give some examples of what kind of complaints people are making about access to land and what the Commission is doing?
I must say that actually the Commission is doing a lot of work now to try and reach rural communities and to encourage government to make it possible for rural communities to access various rights. We are at the ground level, at the provincial level, for example, working with other Chapter 9 institutions. I've just signed an MOU with the Public Protector, but not to create something new, but to formalize the cooperative working relationship that you find in provincial offices where Chapter 9 institutions collaborate at provincial offices. They share information, they share platforms, and that way the reach, the advocacy reach it goes further than it used to go. But of course, it still needs us to do a little bit more work. I toured the Eastern Cape earlier this year, and I went to some of the areas where I found that people were not very sure of the existence of the commission or what it is about, and so on. But understandably, because you find that in those areas, the level of development of roads, communication, and so on is very poor. So when we met with the MEC, we told her that really they have to do something to reduce the urban-rural divide, because in some of the areas there's a big urban-rural divide. But we're doing the best we can in order to reach that. We are using the media, as you know, and you help us a lot, as I said, in reaching those areas, but we can do more. We may need to do pamphlets that are in all languages, distribution, visiting those areas becomes a problem. For example, in very big provinces with small offices, with small staff, it becomes difficult to reach every part of the province. But we're getting there. But we need to do more.
If I could just add, if I may, Chairperson. So the Commission does have quite a widespread advocacy and outreach program which operates through all 9 provinces. In the 2016 year, we reached 51,739 people. In the following year, 2016-17, we reached 83,000 people. So we are seeing an incremental increase in the reach. We are using various ways to try to reach rural and marginalized communities. Each of our provincial offices do have advocacy officers who go out and do rural outreach. We often do them in conjunction with other Chapter 9, so we would go out with the Public Protector. We have a range of ways of trying to reach rural communities. One of them is to train the trainer, so we have human rights focal points in communities that can then assist communities to understand. Also just bearing in mind the complexity of our Constitution in trying to make it simple, trying to make it accessible. We have, in the last year, translated our advocacy materials into all 11 languages in order to assist people in far-flung areas to understand, because rights knowledge is central to rights assertion. If people don't understand their rights, they cannot come to the Commission to lay complaints about their rights. Also bearing in mind the fact that race is still regarded as the most primary sight of inequality in the country, that a lot of people don't understand that they have other kinds of rights as well. So we're also on a campaign to try to educate people so that when they do bring complaints, they can distinguish between what is a human rights violation based on race or a complaint which is based on something else, so that we can start to get the public to understand their rights so that they can make proper complaints, so that our statistics begin to reflect the actual human rights situation on the ground. So we've made significant strides in the last 3 years as a Human Rights Commission with respect to our visibility. We've particularly used community media and have been monitoring the use of community media, and are noticing a significant uptake of human rights reporting in community newspapers and often drops that are often written in the languages of those communities. So we would say that our advocacy and outreach work definitely did have an impact on the outcomes of the report, because that's what enables people to lodge complaints with the Human Rights Commission.
If I may add, there are two other things which should also help us, and extend our reach to far-flung communities, which is the rural community, and also marginalized community. One is that next year the Commission will be working together with the Department of Basic Education, Department of Justice, and Center for Human Rights and University of Victoria to run the school's moot court competition. And we've been informed by the Department of Basic Education that the essay competition on human rights will now be compulsory in all schools in the country for grade 10 and 11. And therefore helping the Commission to reach out to all schools in the country, and therefore by implication rural areas. This actually presents a very important opportunity for the Commission to actually use the schools to extend its reach. We also have an MOU with Safer South Africa Foundation, which also runs programs in schools, and our staff members assist in providing human rights education in the schools, which the Safer South Africa Foundation is working at. This has also helped us also to reach areas where we have not been before. And then we have also recently signed a memorandum of agreement with South African Police, to see how we can work with the police, in advancing human rights. And we're actually meeting tomorrow in Victoria, to discuss how best we can work together. And you can imagine we have over 1,000 police stations in this country, and we were able to basically utilize these police stations in a much more effective manner. That will also be increasing our mandate. We are currently also in discussions with SALGA to actually start to sign an MOU where we can then work with SALGA and reach out to local government across the country, all the areas in this country. So we are concerned, of course, about us reaching out to all South Africans as possible, and all people in this country as possible.
If I can just add to what the CEO said, also just to reflect that we have also as a Commission seen an increase in reporting of the media on human rights. I think which is also gratifying, because we don't just monitor ourselves, we also monitor the media to see the extent to which the media is reporting on human rights, and to what extent human rights is on the agenda for the media. And in the 2-3 financial years, we've seen dramatic increases in the number of media reports on human rights and on the work of the South African Human Rights Commission in particular. Just before we move on to another round of questions, I think I also just want to point out, perhaps Alex, I'm not sure if you want to just talk a little bit about the complaints that we've received relating to gender at the Commission, and our referrals process for those.
Complaints regarding gender, you'd certainly look at our stats and think that perhaps there's a significant underreporting, because obviously in the broader context of South Africa, which we all know has incredibly high rates of gender-based violence and sexual violence. But there is, of course, the Commission for Gender Equality, who we would seek to either refer to or work with in resolving complaints of that nature. So that would be probably the preeminent commission tasked with resolving gender complaints there. In response to your question about access to land, most of the commissions, or something that's very common when we'll deal with that kind of issue, would be the commission dealing with the issues that start to arise where informal communities settle on a piece of land owned by a certain municipality, and the issues that will sort of arise from that. The municipality may seek to evict them, they may seek to rehouse them, we may need to ensure that people are put on certain lists to be relocated, etc. So those would be the types of issues that would come up frequently for us.
Oh, the two questions again. All right. I'll come to you. Where's sorry.
Come here.
I would like to ask, in terms of people that you have found to have violated human rights, what sort of sanctions do you put on them? And with regards to non-compliance, what solution is the Commission seeking? Is it seeking more powers to enforce their recommendations? And if so, what type of powers? And the report and the trend overall with what you have discovered, what does that say about South Africa? The increases and the decreases, and also where do we fit as a country globally in terms of human rights violations?
Can I take the second one as well, and then this will be the last round.
Will you say it's much more safer for activists to defend human rights in South Africa as opposed to other African countries?
Thank you. Chairperson, CEO, does anyone want to discuss on respect to the sanctions?
Well, can perhaps you will deal with the sanction. Can I just deal with the powers that the Commission needs in order to make sure that its recommendations are complied with? My sense is that the Constitution is one document that all of us say we subscribe to. Government says, we live by the Constitution. The ordinary person in the state says they live by the Constitution. The Commission says we expect everybody, we also live by the Constitution. And that Constitution says, work together. It says that there has to be cooperation between first of all, the Constitution says government has the primary obligations to fulfill the rights that are in the Bill of Rights. And then it says that the Human Rights Commission has therefore to promote, protect, and monitor the observance of these rights. But somewhere it then says that government has to work together with the Commission. If that was to be put in place, there would be no need for additional powers, because then that mechanism itself would ensure that the Commission is supported fully in the execution of its mandate, without having to use whatever powers, enforcement powers. The second thing that the Commission would need, rather than additional powers, I think it would need resources to be able to use existing mechanisms in order to enforce its recommendations. One of those is litigation, that the Commission should be able then, when there is a refusal to comply with the recommendations, that the Commission should have the necessary resources in order to initiate litigation. The subpoena powers are used largely where you are still at an investigative level and you need information in order to decide whether a violation of a right has been committed or not, and you need to speak to certain people, and they either refuse to give you documentation or to come along and give you the information that you need, it's only then that you use the powers. I think that perhaps, other than changing the language in the existing legislation, I don't think that there is any additional powers that the Commission would need. The most important thing is that everybody has to be true to the Constitution, you know, and do that which the Constitution expects us to do.
Thank you. On the sanctions, I just want to refer you to two provisions in our human rights. Where human rights are being violated. And then, as the chairperson was saying, Section 181(3), Section 181, subsection 3, says other organs of state must assist and protect the Human Rights Commission, independence, dignity, and effectiveness. So our mandate to secure redress where human rights have been violated is one of our major mandates. And of course, when we make those findings, there has to be a remedy. And I guess what you're talking about are sanctions. And our view at this point in time, following the decisions of the National Court around the powers of the public protector, is that when we make a finding that there has been a human rights violation and certain things must be done, that's binding. And therefore, it must be implemented unless challenged in the court of law. And of course, we have the powers as a commission to also go to court to enforce those findings. That's why, for example, we are currently in the court in case at hand over Edward Zuma's matter, where we actually found his conduct amounted to a violation of human rights. And we already know exactly what has happened. That's why we took Ms. Mombek to court as well over that. And then, secondly, our act, you know, if you look at Section 18 of our act, there is an obligation by public bodies in particular to respond to our findings within a certain period of time. And then, thirdly, something we really don't use that much is that it's actually a criminal offense under Section 4 of our act, that is Section 22, to undermine the work of the Commission. So if we make a finding basically on the public, let's say there's a sewage spilling at the school, and we say clean it up, you ignore it. You're actually undermining the work of the Human Rights Commission. You are undermining the technical Human Rights Commission, and therefore that should be a criminal offense. Something we should not use that much, because the chair was saying we were trying to create a culture of human rights, we're trying to influence everybody to see the value of promoting human rights and not undermining human rights. It's very costly. And that's why, we use all sorts of manners. So yes, we can go to court where we feel we have to go, and we have that. So we can also, just impress on those who have violated human rights, to behave differently. And as the chair pointed out, actually, if you look at our total number of complaints, we actually resolve many of the human rights violations by talking to people to say, please stop and change. It's only under extreme measures that we actually have to resort to court. And we should not really be doing so, especially where, in the context of the government, there is an obligation under Section 7 of the Constitution for all organs of state to promote respect and fulfill human rights. And therefore, you'll be failing as an organ of state when you are told that you're actually violating the right, you just ignore it. So that's the charge actually which we are trying to get to as a commission.
And I'll answer Lufon's question regarding whether South Africa is a safer country than other countries for human rights defenders and how we're doing with respect to other countries. I think there are a couple of things that are relevant with respect to the context within which we work in South Africa. I think undoubtedly one of them is that we do have a free press which does do its work without fear or favor, and I think that's one of the benefits of doing human rights work in South Africa. I think it's also important to remember that the South African Human Rights Commission is part of a continental-wide body of human rights institutions, and we work very closely with other human rights institutions across the continent. We're part of an organization called Memory, so we have constant engagement. South Africa, because of our constitution, is still regarded as one of the places from which best practices does emanate with respect to human rights. The other thing that works in our favor and really does elevate us internationally is that we do have a Bill of Rights, which is justiciable, and that is what makes our constitution so special, that people can and do take power to court when they feel that their rights are not being protected. So we do have a culture of active citizenry who do demand that their rights be protected. And then of course we have our constitution, which is globally revered for good reason. So with respect to human rights defenders, I think South Africa is doing really well, and we host a range of study tours every year by international human rights institutions that come to South Africa specifically because we are regarded as one of the countries that have international best practice, and also the recognition in our constitution that a constitutional democracy is an unfolding process. It's not an event, but it's something that will go on. Ideally, we would want equality to reign and for us not to be as active, but we are, and we are visited often by other international human rights bodies. And on Friday, we hosted Commissioner Michelle Bachelet of the United Nations at the Commission to discuss the work that we do. So I think that with respect to your question, we are highly regarded as a country with a relatively good human rights record and human rights culture. So that answers your question. I'm going to add something.
Just on that question, I wanted to say that actually it's a very interesting question that you're asking whether it is safer here. I must say that there are many countries where it is safe to promote, protect, and enforce human rights. There are many countries that it is safe to do so without fear, favor, and prejudice. The problem is that there are countries where it is extremely dangerous to do so. One of the countries that has become dangerous is the Philippines, where previously it was possible, to work on human rights. But last year, we as the global network of national human rights institutions had to intervene, because of the dangerous situation that was developing, that had developed in the Philippines with regard to their national human rights institution, in order to try and persuade the government to put a hold at it. We do have, as I said, that we have many countries in this continent where it is easy, it's not difficult to protect, but we also have a lot more where it is difficult to do so. You've heard there's a country now that has locked up people because they are of a different sexual orientation. You have countries when you go to the records of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, you find that there are so many cases against them because people get easily arrested, detained for not 2 weeks without trial, but months without trial, and so on. They are not told why, there is no exclusion of torture. There are places where people still get disappeared, and the human rights instruments there, in other words, national human rights institution, cannot do much because they themselves can get detained and so on. It's an issue that I think Africa needs to do more in order to deal with, especially when the African Union has adopted certain periods as periods of human rights.
One, in terms of Section 13 of our Act, we are required to work with human rights organizations. They are a very important partner. So we actually have an interest in making sure that, over and above our mandate to promote and protect human rights, that we do protect human rights defenders and try and make it safe. Because it's a country with lots of problems, but we are committed to doing that. And secondly, the national human rights institutions are also required under the Sustainable Development Goals to assist the Office of the High Commissioner in ensuring better protection for human rights defenders. And the Commission will be engaging in all of the activities next year in doing so. The second issue was, what does the report say about human rights? Yes, I mean, we can see from this area there still lots of challenges in our country, and certainly the report does not reflect all the challenges. It only reflects, those challenges which are brought to attention. But we all know that a lot of work still has to be done in this country in addressing issues of human rights, gender-based violence, high levels of poverty and inequalities, and so forth. So a lot of work still has to be done. The only good thing is that there is commitment on the part of a body like ours and many others to basically ensure that we continue this struggle for human rights. We come from a long, long way back, and I think we are making good progress going forward.
Do you have anything to add? Oh, another question?
Yes, just on that issue, would you say that activists in South Africa are safe, or do you find that they're increasingly coming under threat?
Maybe Alex will talk to that. But I mean, all I'm simply saying is this, that the Human Rights Commission is here to protect rights being violated. So if it comes to our attention that the human rights defenders' rights are being violated, it's our business. And if we don't do anything, we'll be failing in our mandate to do so. But secondly, we'll be undermining our own interest as a commission, because we do need this partnership with human rights defenders. We work with them in order to fulfill our mandate to create a culture of human rights in this country.
For human rights defenders and activists will always require protection in our view, and that is a global phenomenon across the globe. I don't think that South Africa is that distinct from other similarly placed countries where there can be risks in certain circumstances, and otherwise, you have the protections of our constitutional democracy and our constitutional rights to sort of fall back on as well, which is an additional protective measure, unlike some other countries. But obviously, I think that there are circumstances in which it does become extremely dangerous. We've even seen recently and been quite concerned with reports of what has been happening with Auditor General, where certain audits have been carried out and there have been issues. I think for ourselves as a Chapter 9 institution, for other activists, NGOs, other members of Chapter 9 institutions, I think they all require protection, and as a society, we're all responsible for ensuring the protection of our human rights defenders and activists across the board. And then maybe just to finish up for me on what does the report say about South Africa, I think it's such an interesting question. I think if you look at these statistics, you can see that the spectre of apartheid is still looming large over us and is still casting a long shadow. The statistics are undeniable. Black South Africans are being subjected to routine and frequent racial discrimination in South Africa. So that is something that is going to remain a priority for us as a commission. And it does call into question the effectiveness of our transformatory or transformative undertakings. What have we done? Are these mechanisms that we're using to try and transform and to change hearts and minds really working? And then I think that the second statistic certainly up there is giving us an indication that we still haven't gotten the basics right. So water, health, sanitation. We're seeing large gaps across the country, obviously disproportionately affecting communities of color and rural communities as well, where they don't have access to basic services, which we think are extremely crucial to your right to dignity as a South African, which is one of the most fundamental rights that we have in our constitution. So I think that's what the report says about us. So it says about South Africa that we still have a long way to go. Much has been achieved, but there is still much to do.
I've also been informed by my sister who advised me that on our website we have a report actually on human rights defenders, our reflections and the things. It's a good read.
I just also want to, I know Kateko has another question, but I just want to support what Alex has just said. I think it's also important, the media is a very important partner in all of this, and I think it's really important to remember that rights are interdependent and related. We can't really separate rights, and while there is this, fascination with racial inequality, that it really, really is important to draw the connections between, these rights and socioeconomic rights, because they are part of the equality rights as well, and also to make the connection then to the social rights that people have, that they are all equally important, and that they are all there I'm going to take my paper as an after the goes. We are available to do it afterwards if you want to do one-on-one any other time.
Would you say that the insecurity of government funding increase your independence and your work, especially to go against government departments who will identify the least non-compliant? My second question would be, don't you think the criminal provision in the human rights constitution is time to maybe implement that, since you have identified non-compliance as one of the biggest issues?
Yeah, certainly on the issue of independence, there is an obligation by government to fund the commission adequately. And the issue which we keep on addressing, of course, is needed for money. However, what I need to make it very clear is that our funding concerns have not undermined our ability to hold government to account where it is. Because we must have more money. Secondly, we have very, very clear as a community that where we feel that the inadequacy of that funding undermines really our ability to conduct our work as a community, we definitely raise it and we even go because where. And then the section 4 of our act, that is section 22, makes it criminal offense to undermine the right of the community. It's certainly something which was not been using a lot in the past, but it's especially important to us, and we will use it when necessary. But as I was saying, there are many ways we can use it, and we try much as possible to find much more constructive ways of dealing with these issues. So on the issue, for example, of the adequate compliance with our directives and recommendations, we do raise this from time to time in the Parliament, we raise this also in the Presidency, and so on. It's working group. So we might be complaining there and there, but fundamentally I don't think that we are at the level where non-compliance with our recommendations actually undermines. Nobody can really stand up and say the commission what we have. They might have to handle it,
Just to highlight the fact that the issue of adequate financial resources or adequate resources is one of the requirements in the Paris principles that I spoke about. That the government is required under the Paris principle. Government of any country that establishes a national human rights institution, it's required to make sufficient resources provision for that institution to be able to do its work independently and not have the fear that if we challenge anything, the government is not going to give us resources next time, and so on. You know, in other words, it is part of now, I could say, universal human rights understanding that governments have to give adequate financial support to national human rights institutions. It is even more important for us in South Africa because we came yesterday out of the apartheid scenario, and there is a lot that needs to be done in order to correct the damage that was caused by apartheid. Once apartheid didn't provide housing, didn't provide water, didn't provide health care, didn't provide sufficient schools and education for what we now say we are equal. And we are required to make sure that what is in the Constitution is actually implemented by everybody, in particular by the government. And we need to let people know that they've got these rights. We need to let people know that when those rights are threatened or violated, they've got somewhere to go, and that they know how to deal with the threats or the violations of their rights. And where rights are violated, in any case, the Constitution requires us to take steps to provide adequate redress, and we need then resources in order to do that, in order to provide that redress to what we call. So the case for resources is quite important in our context as a country that has just recently emerged from.
Right, I'd just like to thank everybody who came. I'm going to hand over to the CEO to some closing remarks. The report will be available, if not already, on our website. So the electronic is already on the website. The report is already on the website if anybody wants to download it from there. Thank you very much for coming, and I'd just like to hand over to our CEO to close.
Thank you, colleagues. I just want to say, the protection mandate of the Commission is a very important one. It is through this mandate where ordinary South Africans can come to the Human Rights Commission to complain about their rights being violated without paying anything. And we have to provide a redress for that. So in that sense, actually, it can really go a long way in ensuring that we do basically create a culture of human rights, and we do become defenders of many of our people whose rights are being violated and continue to be violated. The challenge for us as a Commission is that we really need to enhance this mandate and make sure that we are able to address the needs of many of our people as much as possible. And that's one of the things which we as a Commission have to be thinking about going forward. Now, there are two aspects to this mandate. One, of course, is